The sound of gunfire echoed through the empty streets of Ukraine as the war between Ukraine and Russia raged on. But the conflict had taken on a new dimension as it turned into a confrontation between Moscow administration and the Russian armed forces. President Vladimir Putin was not happy with the Russian forces' failures in Ukraine, and he was taking matters into his own hands. One by one, Putin had fired many of the top generals and commanders of the Russian armed forces. General Sergei Surovikin, who was in charge of the Ukraine operation, was dismissed by Putin 3 months after his appointment. He was replaced by Chief of General Staff Gerasimov. Similarly, the lead of the Russian paratroopers, Mikhail Teplinsky, was dismissed after serving in Ukraine for 6 months. Now, another surprise name had entered Vladimir Putin's radar. With a sudden decision, the Russian leader prepared the end of another Russian general. It was a striking decision that shocked many. General Rustem Muradov was removed from his post on the commander of the Eastern Military District. He had only served for 7 months before he was removed from the front command in Ukraine. This scandal in the Russian armed forces was recorded for the first time in 2023 as the dismissal of a senior Russian officer by Putin. The reason why President Vladimir Putin fired Muradov was seen as the debacle of Russian forces in Vuhledar. The Russian army had suffered significant losses in recent months as Muradov's command of the Eastern Group repeatedly failed in ill-planned attacks on the town of Vuhledar in the Donetsk Oblast. The Wagner Group, Khanurov's group, and the Russian army were divided into 3 wings within the Russian army. They criticized each other harshly, and the Russian army generals and commanders were fired one by one in the past 14 months. Around 20 Russian generals and more than 1,000 Russian commanders have been dismissed. Under the command of General Rustem Muradov, the Russian army could not reach any of its targets in 2023 and suffered very heavy losses. The atmosphere in the Russian armed forces was tense, and the soldiers were on edge. They knew that any mistake could cost them their lives and their careers. The firing of General Muradov had sent shockwaves through the entire military hierarchy. Everyone was wondering who would be next. The war between Ukraine and Russia had taken a toll on everyone involved. The fighting had been brutal, and the losses on both sides had been staggering. But now, with the Russian armed forces in disarray, the situation was even more precarious. As the war raged on, the fate of Ukraine hung in the balance. Would the Russian armed forces be able to regroup and turn the tide of the conflict? Or would their failures continue to mount and the situation become even more dire? Only time would tell. But one thing was clear. The war between Ukraine and Russia was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The aftermath of the devastating Vuhledar attack has sent shockwaves throughout the Russian armed forces, leading to the dismissal of one of Putin's top generals, Muradov. According to the Netherlands-based research group Oryx, the attack resulted in the loss of 103 military vehicles, including 36 tanks for the Russian troops, while the Ukrainians only lost 20 vehicles. This was due to the lack of demining equipment, which forced the Russian tanks to advance in single file and become easy targets for the Ukrainian forces. The situation has worsened due to the increasing tension between the Moscow administration and the Russian armed forces. Pro-war bloggers and soldiers fighting under Muradov's command criticized the general for his failed operations in Vuhledar. In addition, Russian commentators, including Muradov's own soldiers, widely condemned the attack in the region. The dismissal of Muradov, who previously served in Syria and the South Caucasus, is interpreted as one of the most significant signs of the repercussions within the Russian army. The Ministry of Defense sources made it clear that the decision was directly related to the Vuhledar attack, which was a major failure for Muradov. The situation has further escalated since Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited the front line when he met with Muradov and his soldiers. Some sources claim that the crisis began after the minister's visit, leading to the dismissal of Muradov. Military analyst Michael Kaufman assessed the situation and stated that Muradov's troops repeatedly attacked with small mechanized units on open ground in minefields and achieved nothing in Vuhledar. Muradov had previously attempted to attack Kyiv from the northwest during the first full-scale invasion, which resulted in disaster. The Eastern Russian command lost a total of 33 battle tanks due to negligence in just one day, drawing all attention recently. A Russian soldier fighting in the region announced heavy losses and that only 8 soldiers from a unit of about 100 had survived. The tension between the Moscow administration and the Russian armed forces had reached a high level, causing widespread condemnation of the operations in Vuhledar. The Russian army has been unable to make any progress in Donbass for months, leading to widespread frustration among soldiers and civilians. The dismissal of Muradov is seen as a significant step towards addressing the issue, but it remains to be seen whether it will lead to any positive change in the situation. The future of the Russian armed forces hangs in the balance as they struggle to make headway in their ongoing conflict with Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has been a great source of tension between Russia and the rest of the world. It has caused numerous casualties on both sides and has taken a toll on the Russian military. As a matter of fact, it is hardly surprising that General Rustem Muradov was dismissed in this way, given the war strategy implemented by Russia. The Russian administration generally prefers to hide the negative effects of the war and the failures of the Russian army. But when these hidden facts reach an unacceptable level, the Russian authorities intervene and set a target. This target is usually the top Russian generals in charge of the Ukrainian front lines, like Muradov. Many top Russian generals were fired exactly as we told you. After the Russian administration dismissed the person responsible for failure in the war, it continues its occupation policies as if nothing had happened. But besides Muradov's dismissal, there is another unseen side to this striking situation. Yes, General Rustem Muradov was sacked for his failures in Vuhledar. But what is the current situation of those Russian troops in Vuhledar? For you, we have reached critical data on the latest situation of the Russian military group in Vuhledar after the Russian general was dismissed. Here are the striking details. Russia's elite 155th Marine Corps Brigade has been destroyed and rebuilt 8 times in total since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022, according to a new report. This striking claim was made by ISW, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, in its recent update on the Ukraine war. Early in the war, the 155th Marine Corps Brigade, located outside the eastern city of Vladivostok as part of Russia's Pacific Fleet, was involved in the unsuccessful attempt to capture Kyiv. This Russian military group was one of the several Russian units accused by the Ukrainian authorities of committing war crimes against civilians in the towns of Busha, Irpin, and Gostomel. All 3 settlements were located northwest of Kyiv and were occupied by Russian troops as part of their unsuccessful attack on the Ukrainian capital. Finally, the 155th Russian Naval Brigade was stuck in Vuhledar. The Russian brigade wanted to hit the Ukrainian lines of communication before attempting to encircle Vuhledar. However, due to the shortage of ammunition of the 155th Marine Brigade and the inability to take many settlements around Vuhledar, the Russians could not achieve these goals in any way. Russian military bloggers have argued that current Russian tactics, which include a first frontal attack against Vuhledar and then attacks on fortified Ukrainian flanks, have resulted in high Russian combat losses with no gains at all. This is due to difficult terrain, lack of combat power, and inability to surprise the Ukrainians. The destruction and re-establishment of the Russian 155th Marine Infantry Brigade 8 times in total, largely due to the losses incurred during the prolonged efforts against Vuhledar, had now prepared the end of this brigade. It is claimed that the 155th Marine Brigade was re-established after the dismissal of General Rustem Muradov. However, this brigade could not show the desired performance. In short, the biggest mistake of Russia was to invade Ukrainian lands, even though the Russian administration was dealing with the problems in its own army or its commanders and generals. And the greatest damage for the Russians began when the war in Ukraine turned into a war of attrition. Although they have one of the strongest armies in the world, this strength of the Russian army does not make sense at the moment as they are struck on Ukrainian soil. Also, as Russia continues to fail to achieve its goals in the Donbass, it is likely that more Russian generals like Rustem Muradov will continue to be raised from history by the Moscow authorities as responsible for this war of attrition. The situation is grave, and it is a testament to the harsh reality of war and its devastating effects on both sides. It is a reminder that wars are never won without a great cost, and the casualties of war are not limited to those who lose their lives on the battlefield. The dismissal of General Muradov is just one example of the Russian administration's attempts to hide its failures and shortcomings in the war. It is a tactic that has been used by many other governments and military leaders throughout history, but it is one that ultimately fails to hide the truth. The truth is that the Russian military is struggling to achieve its goals in Ukraine, and the war is taking a heavy toll on its soldiers and resources. The destruction and rebuilding of the 155th Marine Brigade 8 times is a testament to the fact that the Russian military is facing a difficult and protracted conflict in Ukraine. It is also a testament to the bravery and resilience of the Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting to defend their country from Russian aggression. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they have managed to hold their ground and repel Russian attacks, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy in the process. The war in Ukraine is far from over, and the situation is likely to continue to deteriorate unless a peaceful resolution is found. But even in the midst of this turmoil and devastation, there is hope that a brighter future can be achieved. The international community must continue to put pressure on Russia to end its aggression and respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the people of Ukraine must continue to stand strong and united, refusing to give in to the forces of darkness and tyranny. In the end, it is the courage and determination of ordinary people that will determine the outcome of this conflict. And it is their resilience and strength that will ensure that Ukraine emerges from this dark chapter in its history stronger and more united than ever before.